companies are struggling, right? People are fucking acting like they're not. And I think it's setting up a whole new generation of people that come along that feel worse because we're not being honest about our own companies.
I just had an amazing conversation with Wil Reynolds. He's the VP of Innovation at Seer Interactive. Wil has built Seer Interactive to be a powerhouse in the ads, SEO, marketing space. We just chatted for the last half hour about how important it is to be human in this world of AI and in a world of business where it is very, very difficult to both be successful and maintain your humanity. TLDR, keep your humanity. People matter, and you can be successful without sacrificing the things that are most important in life. Let's check it out. It's a great episode.
There was a time in my company where I was changing a process and the team hadn't rolled out the old process that I had changed on them like 3 months earlier. And that's when the light bulb started to click for me that like, I am very comfortable with chaos and change and not knowing what to do next. But that's not always a great thing in certain types of leaders at certain seasons of a business, right? And we're in a more mature season than we were when we were a startup. So I've learned to have to, but that was like a light bulb self-reflection, like, oh shit, I'm changing the process before the other process got rolled out. They're like, yeah. And they're like, and that's exhausting for a team. And I'm like, I could see that. I could see how that would be exhausting for a team.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, when it comes to the AI stuff, is there like, there's a lot of things that you've seen. I want to get to like what you see coming down the road, but like, is there anything that's happened in the last 6 months or year that you're like, hey, stop everyone, you got to do something different? Like, is there anything specific that people are jumping on, or is it still, I don't know.
It's everything. It's everything. Like, first, you have to be educated enough to understand how the different models succeed and fail, right? So, like, for me, if I was like hiring today for a team member, these are the kind of questions I'd be asking, right? Like, oh, I'm going to put this prompt into ChatGPT, 4.0, 01 preview, Claude, and Llama. Why do you think which ones do you think would answer best and why?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because your clients deserve people who, when they bring them tough questions, aren't like, ooh, what's Llama? Then it's like, oh, well, then that means you probably don't know that they just came out with a new version.
Yeah.
Great. So then you just start to be like, shit, like, how are you leading me if you don't know these things? You know what I'm saying?
I'm worried about all the people in the middle. I know there's like the young, youthful, new, excited, trying new things, got the energy, straight out of school or a few years into the business. And then there's the people at the end that are highly experienced that like are making subtle, smart moves. And then there's a lot of people in the middle that are like scared and maybe good enough at what they do right now, but are going to get really, really hit hard in the next day or year.
Who knows when it's coming? I agree. Like, I'm not like one of these doomsdayer kind of people. Like, I'm not like, but like it's the reward system and the incentives that we've set up for capitalism, right? So, you want to grow and you want to hit your stock market goals and numbers. And when all that is there, the incentives are there for leaders to pretty much try to get everything done as cheaply and efficiently as possible. And dare I say, I think the CEOs I respect the most are the ones who are saying like, yes, this is going to replace jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm going to replace X number of jobs by Y time. I think the IBM CEO said that. And I was like, well, I can respect that, because when I get in these rooms with these CEOs, a lot of them say the exact same kind of things. They just don't have the balls to say it to their team. You're like, well, say it to the team, because in these private rooms, you're saying one thing, and you got in front of your team, you're saying something completely different.
Well, that's like that adage has been going around for a while. It's like AI will not replace you. The person using AI will. And it's like, you know what, that's fine. That's fine. Everyone keeps on repeating that shit. And it's like, well, actually, there's a hell of a lot of yous out there that are going to not find a place, not going to have a place. And it's like, I don't know, the same sort of thing. I'm not a doomsday guy, but the reality is things are going to change. How is society going to adapt?
Yeah, you just read what's on I just had my my executive assistant wipe out like 25 years of my experience, and like, you got to be able to handle that and not be afraid of that, and not try to convince people that like no, Will, you're better. It's like, no, 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 no. We were doing some advanced queries in Google, and she had never done an advanced query in her life. And I'm like, oh, well, this is what I would probably do, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, go throw that shit into ChatGPT. Let's see what it comes back with. And it created a better query than I did. I've been doing advanced queries for 20 something years, Booleans and shit. And you're like, oh, right then and there, it's like your ability to look at your work and your tasks through a very dispassionate lens. And I was able to be like, yep, that right there, that experience has no value in the marketplace anymore. Everybody now has that same experience. Like the LLMs got good enough to give everybody that same level of experience. So it's my turn to go find something that they're not good at for now, right? And then just try to stay a couple percentage points ahead of the game.
Well, the world I'm in, I mentioned this earlier about Claude. It's like, I'm working with, it's like working with a junior developer who actually gets it and listens and polishes it all within the space of a couple hours. And like, that's scary. That goes to, by the way, so you have kids. How old are your kids?
9 and 7.
Okay, that's pretty close to mine. I got 10 and 8-year-old, but at least we have time to kind of figure out in our own minds what the hell we're going to advise them to do. Because, for the longest time, it's like, oh, you like building shit, you like Lego, be a coder. Learn how to code. You're going to love it. Well, that's going to change. Maybe there's different building blocks to put in place and the same concepts will remain, but like coding is going to change overnight. Like it's already changing. How do we go about advising the people that we care about? And it's not just kids, it's like your employees, whatever else. Like, how's the landscape going to look, and what are people going to be doing? What are you advising people to do right now? I'm sure you're got kids, not even your own kids, but you're mentoring or people look up to you for advice. Like, what's the advice?
Yeah. So I think the best answers to give are the ones that are your kids, because it's the most personal thing to me. And I'm like, 2 years of college, 2 years of trade school. That's what I'm thinking these days. I've been thinking that for the last year. Like, yeah, dude, like you want to make $150,000, $170,000 a year, you might have to schlub some stuff up a ladder to get on a roof to fix a freaking HVAC unit, right? And if you can't, I was just gonna say, and if you mentally think you're above that, well, then you might be broke, right? So it's like you have to. It's like hedging. It's a hedge. How can I put my time, my learning time, into enough disparate places to where I can hedge against wherever this thing kind of goes? Because AI ain't going on my roof and replacing my HVAC. I'll tell you that.
100%. No, that's it. I came to America 20 years ago. I'm from Ireland originally. I came over here, and 10 years before me, my cousin came over. And I think that's pretty much it in the US of like the migration, until I brought my brother over as well. I got the chain migration going. Of course, that's going to happen as well. But he started an HVAC company. So he spent his first 5 or 6 years crawling through fucking ducts and doing the shittiest, hardest work. But he did that to see the opening. And then he jumped in and he's got a successful HVAC business for the last 30 years, 25 years. And he's solid as a rock. He's not going anywhere. And I'm having fun over here in Techland, thinking this is all good, and had the easy life in many, many ways, the freaking easy life. And it's like, well, there's a day of reckoning for people like us that just, fell into it and are just doing this thing that came so naturally. Well, the world is a little bit different. How do we adapt to that?
Dude, it is. It really is. Like, I just think it's such an interesting time. Like, I find myself, like, I use Descript a lot for video editing and stuff like that. And like that new Underlord is pretty damn good. So I'm watching my ability to, like, things that I would have sent to another person to do are just now done. Interns I would have hired before to help me build some MVPs because I don't know how to code. Don't. I'm like, oh, I'll just write it up myself, put it in Colab, blah, 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 blah. It's something I can manipulate enough, get up an MVP, show it to a couple clients, boom, done. Right? Like, okay, now I can show it to clients without having to go through people that I used to have to go through. So I think one of the things I think of when I think of commerce is I don't believe that we're going to have agents representing our buying process. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, then agents will go out and negotiate. It's like, I think that as much as we don't want to admit, like if you look at an RFP, You look at it, it's like got a bunch of standard questions, but at the end of the day, relationships matter. I've been in a lot of RFPs where we and a bunch of other people got it, and our person was like, I really like you guys. Oh, so it's not just about the answers, right? You're going to help me to try to craft this the right way or whatever, right? And I've been on the other side of that, right? Where you're like swimming in the dark, like what's going on here? Like, I don't really have a sponsor internally. But my point is that people, I think, still like to buy from people. People still like to hear someone's story. Um, and I think that's the beauty of like our company having never been like anything I would consider to be the best SEO firm, right? It's like, no, we've got like some people that work really hard to try to solve problems in interesting ways, and we do the best we can, you know? I will never go out there and be like, we're the best at this or that. It's like, no, 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 there is no best. And I'm okay with that. So I think that but it's like people still buy from us. It's like, why? It's like, it's what you put in the world. It's how you operate. And I think that humans are still going to human, and they're going to buy based in somewhat off of how they feel about things.
It's trust, and again, looking at this world of AI, it's going to get more and more difficult to trust things. And again, what's the point, right? What's the point if you have two AI generated avatars that are talking to each other? What is the point of that? I've just sort of talked about this lately. I was like, yeah, I think and I believe, and I guess I hope, because I want to see a way through this, that the value of personal connections and the value of in real life events and interactions is going to be all that matters, because everything else is going to be unknown. It's going to be like, hey, let's just slap it up there. It's not real. It's back to forward, back to forward. We're going to be so freaking snowed under with bullshit. And with, I'm sure it's good, but if it's all the same, if everything is important, nothing is important.
All the same, right? At the end of the day, this is one of these things too that I just think is so interesting. It's like, if you were to look at every SEO company and say, all right, here's my 30 things that matter to me. We're all basically doing like the same shit. Like, you need content, you need links, you need internal linking, and we might all have our own little small approaches that make it different. But in a world of everybody sounds the same, clients still need to pick one out of the 30 different companies that they could pick from. So how do you pick in a world where people all kind of sound the same? It's people, it's relationships, etc., which I think makes things even worse for people in a world where we're more remote than ever. It's like, oh, not only do we have this AI thing coming along, you now have this like, I'm not building my network the way that you and I would have probably built our networks. So your networks, the bonds in your network are weak links in the chain. Yes, I know you and you know me, but like, you've never really had my back in a non-work context to where I'm like, that's my boy. Like, one time when I was underwater with blah, 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 or my movers canceled at the last minute, and like I put something out on the team Slack and like dude showed up. Like, that's just not happening anymore, right? Nearly as much, which that's how you build the depth of your network, right? It's not just what you see on a Zoom call. It's how people actually treat other people, how they act around other humans. Like, I remember talking to one of the girls I work with, and she was like, dating during the pandemic was really hard because whenever you were dating, it was just like you and that person together, right? Because you had to be concerned about the bubble and all that stuff. And she's like, you got to see how a guy acts around his other guy friends to know who that guy really is. And I was like, that's a great freaking point, right?
Yeah.
But then it's like, in a world where it's just the two of us and we're together for like a week, in Brooklyn, hanging out in your apartment or my apartment, then like, you're going to be a certain type of person. What I really need to do is see, like, when those chains are unleashed, are you the same like sweet, nice guy that I got like 24/7? Or is there a part of you that's a freaking frat boy Neanderthal that I just don't get to see because we're not spending time around your friends, right? So you get to see different sides of people when they're in social settings. And I think that affects how we feel about them and how we think about them.
Yeah. That's funny. No, it's like, I think the pandemic is insanity as well. Just like, I think it feeds the part of the pandemic that took everybody away and put people online is now like 100,000 million X because of AI, right? It's like, it was this, we're seeing squares on a screen, and that's all the freaking is. Like, we got it. People got to get out there again. I don't understand how a relationship can even exist if there's no trust. Will, we had an employee who had a social security number that we believed was in the United States, that we had onboarded, and suddenly we realized something's up here, and the guy was not who he said he was. He was not even in the country. To the point where I pick up and I'm like, hey, dude, I want you to walk outside right now and I want to do a video call. I want to see if the sun is shining at the moment. Like, this is the sort of shit that's happening. Like, this is the sort of shit that's possible right now. We had another example where we hired someone in the middle of the pandemic, again, in the middle of the time when it was so hard to hire people, where we hired this kid who was great on paper, seemed good for the next couple of days, and he just seemed to be absent. Next thing we know, within 3 or 4 weeks, I think it was 4 weeks, I was like, listen, this is not working, you got to go, whatever else. And I was like, listen, I felt bad about it. We paid him to the end of the month. We're going to pay him to the end of the month. I had no sooner put down the phone or got off the Zoom than I see on LinkedIn that he's at a different position from a month. Like, he must have taken on 2 jobs. So I call him back. I'm like, dude, remember that time I told you I was going to pay you to the end of the month? That's not going to happen. Number one, I was like, if you want to get paid, I'm going to check. I'm going to call this number that you say you're working with. We're going to have a little chat, or else you can accept this. And he was like, okay, sure, fine, let's go. And disappeared, never to be heard from again. Like, this shit's happening out there. Like, these are 2 personal experiences, which
those are brutal.
Really
how in reflection, like, what's your takeaway from that?
Oh, the takeaway is, like, have much, much better hiring practices, number one. I think the dude with the 2 jobs, like, as soon as we realized he was not present, whether he's not present in terms of time or present in terms of mental capability, either way, I think we act on that pretty well. I didn't think we pushed it any further. Like, we did what we had to do as soon as we realized it was a problem, and then dealt with it. The guy who said we put him through Gusto. He said he is who he said he was. He was a contractor. He was supposedly who he said he was. The reality, again, it brings it more to be really needing to see people face to face, really. And everybody, we're going to have on our phones. Our iPhone is going to be responsible for telling that we are actually a human, real person all the time. And, you can see some of the identifiers, like Stripe are doing it right now, that'll pop open and it'll identify you. It'll take the 3D picture and ensure you are who you are and shoot your ID at the same time. Those things are going to be absolutely vital, because whether they're robots or whether they're real people in some, banana republic or more nefarious, shit's going on. Shit's happening.
Oh, yeah. It's like, I don't know, man. Like, that just makes me feel like, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to sit with.
This goes back to the trust, dude. It goes back to that, like, doing business with somebody. Business doesn't stop on external. Business happens in a person-to-person level every single day. You know
what? I just had coffee with one of my alumni, and you're right. Because there's a history, where there is a history, I'm like, okay, that person's got integrity. We've seen them for years. They worked at our company before. Well, he worked in person, so he has a bigger network because he was here with a lot of other people. I bet you if you look at somebody who was hired in the last 3 years remote versus somebody who spent 3 years at Seer pre-pandemic, the number of people they could call in our company to be a reference and whatnot is probably cut in like 70%.
Yeah.
Which, oof.
It's happening.
I don't like the way this conversation's going, but it's real. It's like, because I feel so much that, like, part of the whole opportunity to help people in their careers is very, like, you get them all together, you put them in the pressure cooker, we figure things out together, we work together, and you create these deeper bonds that even after you leave, you've now got this network. And now, it's like, I'm better off going back to my alumni who I know who they are and what they were all about before I go and hire somebody new off the street.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky hiring anyone. Like, I'll answer your question as well about what we do now. And this makes me think, like, I don't know what your company's been like the last year, but companies like ours, the bureau and everything else, there's a lot of companies out there struggling. And a lot of them that are a lot worse than they look publicly. And I will put that at us. We look great publicly. You know what really is happening? It's getting much more competitive. There's not as much work out there. The pipeline is shorter. Like, ultimately, we did layoffs a couple of years ago, and it could happen again. And when we do, and this is what I want to bring it to you, is like, do you want to do layoffs like Cisco, one of these big companies that it's like, hey, you get laid off and somebody gives you a box and you get the hell out of the door right now? Or do you want to be a company that's like, hey guys, this is happening. Let's wind down. Let's say bye. Let's chill out. You got space the next month to say bye, to hang out. Like, we'll do what we can to help if we need you. My point about it is like you want to hire in a way that's breaking up is going to be okay. You know, that there's a level of trust and there's a level of, decency from both directions. And that's hard to do digitally. And
It's
maybe,
very hard to do. It's very hard to do. And dare I say, I think the Cisco approach is actually better. Like me personally, I don't like that. Me as like, I want to be able to have as little negative impact hanging over my head and clouds hanging over my head for months at a time. You're better off saying, here's your box, here's your severance. If you get a call between 10 and 11, you're over. Because what will happen is what my experience has been is that when you try to go above and beyond in some of those instances, you have expectations with going above and beyond as a leader. And when those expectations aren't fulfilled, you then take it harder, which then means you're not as good of a son, a father, a husband, or whatever, because you're carrying this, like, you can't believe I did this thing. I know that people don't do this for people. Like, they usually pull the Cisco shit and they're like, fuck you, you're out. Here's your box. And like, I did this. And then I basically got treated the same way as Cisco. For me, it was like, I learned this lesson early. It's like, when you look at the percentage of people that give you 2 weeks notice, and when you're a company that doesn't treat them like 2 week notice employees, there's both sides, right? Yeah. It's like, did I give you the bare minimum, the accepted minimum on healthcare? No. On profit share? No. On like opportunities to travel and go into conferences? No. Like, so I'm not doing bare minimum for you really anywhere that was within my control. But yet, so often you see folks be like, man, like, I'm going to give you my 2 weeks. Thank you so much. And I hope this works out great for you and me, blah, 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 blah. We wish them luck. But you're like, ooh, there's like a difference there. And that's okay, because there's a power imbalance. I get that.
Yeah.
But still, I learned early on, like, I take it a lot harder when I don't treat somebody like a 2 week employee, but I get treated like Burger King, like, yo, here's my 2 weeks and I'm leaving. So then, therefore, I think if you have to do layoffs, it's just easier to make it clear, cut, and dry, because if you try to do too much, you almost can't help but like feel more of the sting.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I do want to shift gears. We'll get out of this darkness. We'll get into it a little bit lighter, but it's still
it's good. So I think it's really good because it's real shit. Companies are struggling, right?
Yes.
People are fucking acting like they're not.
Yes.
And I think it's setting up a whole new generation of people that come along that feel worse because we're not being honest about our own companies. So when we're not being honest about our companies, we make other entrepreneurs feel worse about theirs. And then once we get at a bar or somewhere with these same people, you're like, oh man, like, we're not growing at all this year. Oh, we're down 30% or whatever. And they're like, and you can just feel they're like, oh, it's not just me. But yet online, God forbid we say some shit like that. So then I think that was an important conversation for us.
Totally. Well, no, I think that's it. It's funny. Like you see people online telling about the stories of how they'd gone through this thing. And you're like, wow, that's really interesting. I'm like, why the fuck am I just hearing about this now? So you're able to talk about shit that's bad when it's good. 3 years later, it's not anymore. But now everything's great.
Bro, that is the realest shit. So there were times where I actually wish, I've been very public about many things on Seer's journey. And for 22 years or so, it was always like up and to the right until we hit the pandemic. You popped up and then you dropped down and then we flattened out for a couple of years. And I think this year we might actually grow a little bit. But I always kind of wished that the road was a little bit harder for us, because then it would test how open are you actually going to be about shit, but it was too easy. So, I have very little respect for people who tell their story after it all worked out, because it's like, oh, if it didn't work out, you would have kept it to yourself. But yet now you want to get the kudos for being transparent about this and that. And what you really want is you want to be known as being inspirational, as you can tell other people they should hang on when things get hard. And look how I ultimately pivoted and turned out. And it's like, man, the graveyard of companies is full of people who pivoted 30,000 times trying to make it work. And all they got is a bunch of kids that don't know who the freak they are because they were spending too much time on work and a divorce. And it's like, who's written about that? How many freaking entrepreneurs, and we know it's true, too much time on the business, not enough time on the family, divorce. Now, if you were to say, hey, Will, do you have one instance of one blog post of all the videos you've consumed, all the content you've consumed about entrepreneurship? Have you ever seen somebody completely break down how they spent too much time on the business and that resulted in a divorce, which oftentimes cuts the valuation of their business in half fucking anyway? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Zero. I can't think of one person, but we all know it's true.
Yeah, totally. Well, I've got the opposite story. I have the divorce popping in that made it impossible to run the business, and having the stress of life going on, going through the personal stuff, and then feeling like I've lost control of the business because your hands are not on the wheel. Your hands are on a different wheel, a more important wheel, keeping your shit together. You know, so
For
like,
you.
it's yeah, but it's again, that's the life of the entrepreneur, and there's the other side of like what's real and what's not real, where you have this like, you know, really sunny side of, hey, start a startup, it's great, everybody should start a startup. You know, when I drives me crazy when I hear that, oh, and this encouragement to like, you should start a startup. I think back and support anyone that's about to do stuff, but make sure they freaking know this shit is not easy. It's no matter how long it takes, it's going to be. So this turns to a developer I used to work with, is a real good friend of mine. He used to always say, whenever you're given estimates, you double it and change the increment of time. So if it's going to take 2 days, it's like 8 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that kind of philosophy of like, shit is going to be far harder. It's going to take far more out of you, and it will take far longer than you expect. And if it doesn't, it's probably a bubble.
And it probably won't work. And you may have some great experiences. You may have the ability to not have regret. But what you probably aren't going to have is a success, right? Or you
Yes.
will change what success is once you realize that you're not actually getting to the levels you had hoped for yourself. So then you can tell yourself to hang on when all the other metrics are telling you to shut it down. And I think, you know, for me, I remember kind of telling somebody I was working with or mentoring, I'm like, you got to write down I'm going to break up with this business if it doesn't do X and Y time, and write it down and give it to as many people as possible, and then share your monthly numbers with them, because there's too much inspiration pouring out there to where like all you hear are the stories of like somebody almost went out of business. You know, YouTube almost went out of business and they were a gaming company and then they pivoted to video and now billions, you know, like those stories are so easy to consume that you actually need to write it down so that you know that at least you can check in with your freaking self and be like, I told myself that if I did not get to this point by this time, I would shut it down. I can read that and then I can say, I am choosing not to do that. But like, otherwise you'll just keep telling yourself stories.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough balance. It's funny when you're speaking there, it's making me think of like that, you know, the shit going around on LinkedIn. It's like the Spindrift, the can. It's like, oh, the marketing, when they changed the brand, it went from like a $200,000 company to a $20 million company because they changed the fucking design on the can. And I'm like, please stop with this nonsense, you know? But
Nonsense.
So shifting gears to go back to something else. It's like, at what point, because, okay, I'll give you sort of an anecdote. I'm on the metro in DC. I'm walking in the metro and I see this guy who I recognize. I've seen him around at meetups. I've seen him before. And he goes, oh, you're the 3 Advanced guy. You guys are doing amazing. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, it's kind of what I want people to think. Like, the better we look like we're doing, the better value we're providing generally, and the more work we should be getting. So a part of me is like, this is great. That's exactly what I want you to think. Something out there is working. So like, how on earth do you balance that though with, hey, listen, you're struggling, you're honest, but you still want people to trust in you. Like, people's trust are going to be often based on, you know, how confident and how sure you are, and that's sales.
I disagree. I think that people will trust you more when you feel like a real human going through real shit, and that it almost is the ultimate. That's how confident I am. I'm confident enough in my team, my business, that I can tell you that business is hard and not think that that fucking defines me or my value. Right. So for me, especially when shit was rough, I mean, this last year has been a lot better, but the year before and the year before, rough for me is like flat. You know, I just never dealt with those emotions before, right? Of being down off the pandemic and then being flat for, 2 years after that. And So that was my version of being down, right? So I would, every time I met somebody, they'd be like, oh, how's things going? I'm like, flat, down, like instantly, right? Because it's like, I'm also one of those people, I believe that whenever somebody asks you how you're doing, I always pause and I actually think of how I'm actually doing at that moment. And I try to answer it as truthfully as I can, because our default state is great, company, crushing it, whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't want to contribute. I don't want to contribute to that narrative of everybody's crushing it. So therefore, when I'm doing well, I'm like, oh, things are going good. I'm really happy. Things are going great. They are right now. But also, like, I have zero problem telling somebody, like, oh man, I'm getting crushed. Like it's hard. I had to do a layoff. Like the minute we did layoffs, we had to lay like 7 people off or whatever. Like whenever people would ask me how I'm doing, I'd be like, oh man, I just had to let 7 people go. Like was first answer. Why? Because it was real. It was honest. It wasn't like, oh, we're turning a corner. It was like, no, we're getting our fucking faces punched in. I spent 8 months supporting a team of people that I probably couldn't really afford to support. And then somebody sat me down and said, Will, that's going to be a negative $800,000 hit next year to hold on to a group of people that have no pipeline, no nothing. Like, what are you going to do about that? And that's when you have to look at the rest of your team and what you can help them do with their families versus the other folks that are around. And I think that's a really tough thing. We don't talk about layoffs enough. And it's like, here's the thing, like, how long should you not get paid your market value because I'm trying to hold on to your friend? We don't talk about this as entrepreneurs enough. And it's like, we don't want companies to do layoffs, but what we do want is our promotions, our raises, because shit's getting more expensive. Inflation's going up. Cost of a house is going up. And it's like, well, we're not going to give you a raise because we are going to take care of all these other folks in our company right now. And someday it might be you and we're going to take care of you. People are like, I'm leaving then. And you're like, oh, got it. Like, all right. So it's a very tough decision when you're in that mode.
Yeah. The reality is like people have to survive. The company doesn't survive, nobody survives, right? And I don't like it. It's probably the same it's not the same everywhere, but certainly with a lot of people I know that run companies, like they do make the decision later than they should because there's a humanity involved, because they build culture, because you care. But it's a dangerous thing to do. Like I'm sure remote, you would like to be more cutthroat.
Think about remote. Right. It's like, this is another thing that saddens me about this is it's like, because we're living in an AI world. So now you got the AI, it's able to do all kinds of cool shit. And you have, I believe, executives more disconnected. The people who make decisions about who stays and who goes are more disconnected from the people that their decisions impact than ever. Right. You now have people starting and leaving in companies and people are like, oh, they were here for 2 years. Who was that? Right. So when you have that happening, I think it just makes it even easier for an executive not to pause and be like, wait a second, that's Paul. Like, all right, let me try to give him another set of training and get him like geared up for this AI trudge that we're going to go do because it's so important for him because I met his kids. And it's like, now it's like, I don't know if you got kids or not. I don't know your name or not. Don't know how long you've been here or not. So like, you're now a number on a spreadsheet, which makes it easier for me to just make decisions in a colder way, which I don't like that. I don't like that as a future of our society and where we're going.
Are you guys staying remote or do you still have a building?
Yeah. No, we have a few people in today, but not many. We're downsizing our spaces, and it's just the hand you're dealt. Like I do not cry over the hand that I'm dealt. Like this is the hand that we're dealt. This is the way that the world is now, and I do not have a good enough reason to tell people why they should be in person. Like if I could ever come up with something, I wouldn't accept from one of my leaders being like, hey, well, I just got this feeling that we're going to do more better stuff if we were together. I'd be like, no. What's your hypothesis? How long are you going to run that hypothesis? How much do I need to invest? If I were to go to my team and be like, yo, I just want people kind of around. So I want you to come in 3 days a week or whatever, if you live within X number of miles of the office, they should be asking me questions like, okay, well, what do you think that's going to, if I have good team members, they're going to ask me, well, what do you think that's going to do for the business? Oh, I think we're going to innovate. Okay, well, if we innovate more and do more stuff and know each other better and spend more time in the community, then what does that do? And it's like, so I don't have a good answer. So therefore, I'm not moving in that direction.
Real question: is your culture as good as it was?
It can't be.
But then, it's certainly a reason to consider getting people all back together again. And again, there are So here's the thing, right? There's a difference between, and again, being remote and being in person is like, you can't, it's not a 1 or a 0 here. Like we thought we were remote before because we were hybrid. We had a few people working remote and they were fantastic, but we still were not remote. We were hybrid from and in person. Now it's flipped to being like, if we get an office, and hybrid from remote, which is like, it's not a better place to be. It doesn't, and again, it doesn't, I say it doesn't feel good. And I hear what you're saying. You're like, hey, show me the numbers, show me the proof. But we're definitely missing the interactions. We're definitely missing the, hey, let's talk about this thing that's important in a way that's not important. As opposed to, hey, we've got a meeting to talk about this important thing, and then we don't talk about it again until Friday afternoon at 2:30.
Well, dude, like when we were in person, we used to switch seats every year. So at some point, you would spin a wheel, you'd switch seats. I stole this from HubSpot. And because we're an open office, that meant that like every year, you could be sitting next to the CEO. You could be sitting next to the CFO, and you're going to hear stuff. Even if it's not your meeting, you're going to hear stuff, and you're going to be like, oh shit, is that what it's like to run a business? Is that what it's like? Now we can't do that. And also, like, you know, you would sit near new people, you would gain new friends, new contacts, you would expand your network. It was a forcing mechanism. And because I think of our ethos as a company with volunteers and things like that, you're like, wow, it helped you to build this momentum that there was a lot of good people around you whom you otherwise would never run into. Right? You're like, oh, you're in the other division. I would never have a reason to really interact with you, ask you how your kids are doing, whatever, unless we were on a project together. And now I'm seeing things about you. Like we used to, we have thank you cards. So we had a thank you card station in our office, right? Like, so, you know, everywhere we had thank you cards. So back in the day, bro, everybody's cubes were lined with all the thank you cards. They were written by other employees. So when you walked in here, you could just kind of see people who had been here for years. They're like, cubes were plastered with thank you cards. And like, that's a physical artifact that when you leave a company, you take those with you and you're like, wow, there's a lot of people who had really good things to say about my work and me and working with me. That isn't some thanks in an email that you're never going to fucking get again.
Well, let me ask you, if you were the 20-something-year-old kid starting over again, and you were starting a business, you're starting a thing, would you be in person or would you be doing it remote? And I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, because if it was me, I probably would be yes, and in person. But knowing that the world has changed, maybe the young people their whole experience is different. So it's hard for me to imagine what it is that they need or what they want, or you know, and maybe what they need and what they want are two completely separate things, by the way, which speaks to maybe the need for the in real life back again. But it's tricky. It's you know, the culture thing is like,
without a culture, it's like, what do you have? So again, it's like all those things we talked about earlier. Like without a culture, you're an SEO company or search company or whatever. And when people go to the marketplace, they're like, oh, well, everybody kind of does the same services. Everybody does the same things, basically. So then, like, how do I pick somebody? You know what? I'm going to pick them. What's different, right? It's track record. Oh, who you've worked with in the past. So history matters, right? How you do things matters. So yeah, I mean, if I was starting a company again, I think it would probably be a competitive advantage to start it in person, because our people would learn faster from each other. They would have tighter bonds. They would be more in the trenches with each other when shit hit the fan, versus like, who are you again? Okay, I'll help you out with a little bit of work, right? So I probably would, if I was starting from scratch, because then the ethos would be, this is what I believe, right? I think that it's important for us to have an impact on our community. I think it's important to be able to hear when somebody's having a hard fucking day that's next to you in a cube, to help them, put your arm around them and say, yo, man, you want to go for a beer? Yo, man, you want to go for a walk? Like, I can hear that, like, things are probably a little bit tough for you. Things are tough for you right now. There's somebody here in this building, in this company, that heard you have like an exhale that made me say, you know what? Like, I'm going to be there for you. Right. And I'd be like, I would just have to make the strategic bet that those bonds will lead us to winning in the marketplace over a group of people who have like a loose culture, but like, you know, once it's done, it's done. Now for me, what would happen is I would then just open up smaller offices everywhere. So that's what I had started to do when we were in. I struggled to open my second office because of cultural reasons. But then what I realized is you could use your main office to incubate people who you could see if they really were about that culture, And then you could be like, awesome, I'm going to have you open my next office and then keep that thing going. So what I could have seen is like we're going to pick 5 cities. We're going to be in those 5 cities, those 6 cities, so we can get the talent that's spread out. We're not going to have people in the office every fucking day. I don't think that's important. I think it's important to maybe be like, once a month we work together for a week and then we go back, or maybe some days people come in 2 days a week, but we're going to realize that we're fucking humans. And I never want to, I'll leave you with this because then I have to wrap, because I know all the technical difficulties that we had. When I started this business, I told the team I was never going to be bigger than 10 people because I didn't want to be big, right? And I was like, where does that kind of come from? And it's because I think there's power in being connected. Like I loved like my 4th employee, I still remember her favorite college football player.
Yeah.
Because we were close, we were tight, we were small. She hasn't worked here in fucking 12 years, right? So then there was this like tightness. There was this like way of hearing somebody talk about the game this weekend. And then you're sitting there as a CEO taking notes on people being like, oh, you're a big Penn State fan and Tony Hunt's your favorite player. So then one day when she crushed it for me, I sent her an autographed jersey of her favorite football player. And then that made her hopefully think, damn, like that guy really listens. He really gives a shit, right? It's a lot harder to connect with people at that level in a remote world. And for me, my style was always like, I really care deeply about you. So how can I try to get to understand more about you? But then what I loved is when we had to open a second office and then we were thinking of opening a third at the time, it was one of those things where I'm like, oh, well, it's also really cool to give somebody this like culture, having seen how they treated people locally, and then like go try to establish that in your version of that in another place. But that the core is always part of like part of the roots of how we got down and how we did shit. So then people knew how to act in a new place. So for me, I think if anything, because I wouldn't want to miss out on the talent, I wouldn't want to miss out on the local community impact. Man, if I could open in a second office right now, I'd go to fucking Detroit. Boom, right? Like, let's go in another city where people are overlooking them and like there's opportunity there and like we would matter there. Like a mayor would come out and be like, oh, great, this big ass company here, they're like opening an office here, right? So like, I would probably go that route because if I don't have a legit reason why people should be in person, I don't like forcing it, right? But what I would do is I'd be like, all right, we're going to have 5 like studios. They're going to be small, but we're going to commit. And then you think about your job postings. You're like, we're going to commit to getting together because we actually believe that it's really important to know your neighbors, right? Like it's important. It's important to know when you can help somebody out when they're struggling with something. And it's not always just work in this fucking report that they need done by Thursday. Sometimes what people's struggles are mental things. They're going through a divorce, right? Like, I've had people open up with me all kinds of shit. Dude, people have cancer, all kinds of shit that doesn't just like get to your desk. But someday you hear something that's a little bit like, oh, that sounds person's having a tough time. Let me just ask them what's going on. And you find out their parent passed away or something like that. And then you're like, okay, like how can we help you through this time? You know what I'm saying?
The colors, it makes them, some things make sense. They aren't just overlooked or put it down to bad performance. Like shit, people are going through shit. And if you can catch them in that moment, you can solve the problem, because otherwise it'll fall apart completely because you weren't there, or the business doesn't give a shit. And again, the business is a business, but you can be humane. You can still look out for people and still run an effective business.
Dude, I got 20 something years of saying that like that's possible. Like you can combine fast growth and all that shit with like treating people in a way that says you are a lot more to me than a number. And I think that you can do that remotely. It is just really, 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 really hard. And it takes a lot more intentionality, whereas in person, you just accidentally hear shit, right? And not everybody wants to be approached with like, what's going on in your life? Some employees are like, don't ask me that. Like, I don't want you to know my life like that. Other people will open up to you. So then you're like, well, I don't know who to go to and how to show them that I don't want you to just to be a number to me. But like, how do I get there with you in a way that you actually really feel it? And it's not just some shit that I say in a slide deck somewhere.
Listen, well, I appreciate it. I know you got to move on. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate getting into the some of the difficult things, as well as like just I feel like it's all the message I'm getting, even from AI to running a business to everything else, is like there's just the power of connection, right? The power of connection and in real life and understanding people, and hopefully that works out, and hopefully that funds both the business success as well as just being a good person and flowing through to the community impact as well.
That's what I like that Seer gets to prove, at least in our space. We're independent. We've grown for a long time, year after year after year, steady high growth, and we did it in our own way. We did it spending time volunteering with people and things of that nature and helping other people. So I hope that's the legacy that we leave at our company, is that like these things aren't mutually exclusive. You can bring your team with you, you know?
Awesome. I love that. We'll finish on that. Will, thank you so much for joining me. That's Wil Reynolds. He's VP of Innovation at Seer Interactive. And really appreciate the conversation. Despite all of our tech challenges, we got it done, my friend. We got it done.
We got it done. All right, man.
All right, take it easy. Thank you.
Adios.